Welcome to Unity Now, the podcast where we discuss unity in the face of division. Inspired by the Unity 2020 plan, we strive to unite Americans by highlighting the middle ground between the two dominant parties and promoting the individual over groups. Each episode, we will bring you exciting, well-informed guests and host nuanced conversations about politically charged subjects. Our goal is to bring an end to the ideological war threatening the collective well-being of this great country.
Welcome back to the Unity Now podcast. I'm your host today, Toby Davis, and I have the distinct pleasure to sit down with two ambassadors of Braver Angels from Virginia, Breyette Covington and Elizabeth Chan. Welcome, Breyette and Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Yeah, let's start by having each of you introduce yourselves with some background information, if you don't mind. And Breyette, we can start with you.
Sure. Background information in general. I live in Augusta County, Virginia. My family moved here in 2015 and was originally born in New York City and have lived and worked in lots of different places around the world, but love calling this area of the world home. Shenandoah Valley is gorgeous. I've been involved with Braver Angels for about 6 months or so, a little bit less, as an ambassador, and I'm just really excited about their mission to bridge political divides, and am really happy to be here with you and with Elizabeth, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth?
So very similar to Breyette, I also born in New York City, and I grew up in Fairfax, and I live in Arlington, Virginia now. I've been involved in Braver Angels for about 6 months, and also just looking for people to talk politics with. So I'm the part of Virginia that's really close to Washington D.C. So politics is top of mind for everyone near me, and it has gotten so polarized just everywhere. I think it hit DC first because we only talk about politics, and we have Congress among us. So we always knew that it was getting toxic pretty fast. So finding something like Braver Angels was pretty amazing.
Yeah, thank you for both of you for that. And then Breyette, and I'll go to both of you, if you could, in your eyes, kind of describe the organization Braver Angels, what that is for anyone who is unfamiliar with it.
Braver Angels is an organization dedicated to bringing people together from across political spectrums. And actually, I think I was going to talk about volunteer opportunities, and Elizabeth was going to talk a little bit more about the organization and its
Absolutely,
history.
Go ahead.
I will hand off.
So Braver Angels, it was originally titled Better Angels after the Abraham Lincoln Gettysburg Address speech, where he talks about the better angels of our nature, and was started around the time of I think in the aftermath of the 2016 election, when people were so divided. So many news outlets noted that so many people who voted for Trump didn't know anyone who voted for Clinton, and so many people who voted for Clinton didn't know anyone who voted for Trump, and yet millions, tens of millions of people voted for each one, and we didn't speak to each other. We barely knew each other, and somehow we were not even strangers, but enemies. So Braver Angels, as Breyette said, is about bridging the divide, having people talk to each other across the spectrum, but it's also about working on ourselves, a lot of it, to reduce some of that hate we have for each other person, because the people in Braver Angels and the ambassadors, we all believe that there are lots of things that need to change in America, and there are lots of things that we can improve, and we need to work with each other and not hold other American citizens as enemies. We all have to respect each other and get back into political discourse with each other.
Very good. And so, Breyette, you wanted to touch on volunteer opportunities?
There's so many. I looked it up just to refresh myself today, and it's pretty amazing, going from organizing, helping to plan debates and workshops, moderating, working on the Zoom end of things, or legal, HR, office, computer work, fundraising, On the Braver Angels website, there's a pretty extensive list of opportunities for volunteering.
Okay. And we'll, of course, have all those links in our show description on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts. So to get everyone pointed there. I think if I had to guess, a lot of our listeners might already know about Braver Angels, but we will not make that assumption and hope that we can point as many people there as we can. So let's get into it, right? We asked the two of you to come together, review some very politicized topics, and choose one to come on our show and discuss, with each of you kind of leaning in a different direction on that topic and in politics in general. And I don't want to give it away. Maybe does one of you want to kind of go through that selection process and the topic you chose?
I think the selection process and kind of that background information is probably as interesting as anything that we will talk about today, just kind of the process that we used. We came together actually not really having known each other in person at all, or even virtually, before having been presented with this opportunity. So we came together, I think, with the idea that we wanted to form or not preclude the opportunity for a friendship. And that was primary to us. And so as we were figuring out how to get to know each other more, what kind of topic to put on the table for this podcast, we kept, I think, respect and kindness for each other primary, kind of protecting the possibility for a friendship before anything else, before trying to convince each other of a position, before trying to advance some kind of an agenda. So I really appreciated the opportunity to kind of do that with somebody that I didn't know. Maybe it's more layered if you do know somebody and you already have a complicated history with them, and then you want to talk about a contentious issue. But sure. I think just the process of exploring this idea with Elizabeth has given me courage in approaching other people who I don't know very well at all and saying, hey, you want to be friends and you want to talk about difficult things? We can do both. So that's a bit of a background of how we started. What am I missing, Elizabeth?
Yeah, we talked about the meta thinking about the topic. So we were presented with a few topics, and we had talked about our special relationship. And in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder, as Breyette mentioned, than talking to someone maybe that is in your family that you have political discussions with. We don't have necessarily a built-in relationship that we wanted to preserve. But, also we could, because we're strangers, we could also just be yelling at each other on Twitter. That's like the other option. We could easily discard the relationship because there wasn't really one. We just met at a Braver Angels event, and we're both from Virginia and had that in common. And so we were given a few topics, and we wanted to make sure that we were picking a topic that satisfied certain criteria, which were that it was something that both of us were at least somewhat interested in, because why would we talk about something that we don't care about or that we feel that we don't know anything about? We felt that we should pick a topic that we're on opposite sides on, and that we are the correct sides, so that I would, I'm a conservative, or in Braver Angels, we call this a red. Breyette is more progressive, and in Braver Angels, we call that a blue. So we wanted to make sure that we were representing the right sides. In politics, I think it's a little too easy to assume that you take every position on your side. And that's not true for, I think, most people. It's not true for us. And we want to take something that wasn't too, we were too invested in, and that we just couldn't talk to someone else about this side, and we couldn't tolerate someone who held a different view. And I think this is a pretty good rubric in that we didn't come into this thinking we can just talk about anything and it will be fine, but we were very mindful of what we felt emotionally ready and intellectually ready to talk about. And we also talked about, one of the other topics that we had considered was cancel culture. And that kind of played into our role of topic as well, because I'm a red and I live in Arlington County, which is outside of Washington, D.C., which is a very blue area. And Breyette is a blue and she lives in a very red area. And we were discussing how even talking about this topic or even being associated with a position might not be beneficial to our careers. Cancel culture was, I think, probably a close second or third to what we were thinking about, because it's something that is really critical. It's critical to the mission of Braver Angels in that we need to be able to have a safe space to talk to each other. And if we're not, if we don't feel safe, if we don't have that ability to hold a view, to talk about it, or to hold different views, then we can never talk to each other. We can never express these views to each other. So maybe in a different conversation, we can talk about cancel culture, but it was something. I guess in the end, we picked a very controversial topic, and we just made a little side note, like, oh, this might not be good, but we did think about it.
Right.
And
exactly
without further ado, that topic is abortion.
Yes, to quote SNL from last week, what a fun solvable problem we picked.
That's funny.
It was Kamala Harris. It was Maya Rudolph playing Kamala Harris talking about immigration.
That's awesome.
Well, I even remarked to our podcast team when we were discussing the episode, and Kimberly brought up the conversation with the two of you and the topic, and I said, "Well, how crazy is it that today in 2021 that at least to me, and I think they all agree that topic doesn't go top of the mind of one of the most polarizing topics, at least right this minute, right? And at least nationally, it doesn't seem to be the center of the conversation anymore. Not to say it won't in the future, but so the two of you are going to try to have a conversation where the two of you don't necessarily agree on that topic and the best way forward to handle the situation, but you're willing to listen and have the conversation, like you said, a safe space to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. And some of the kind of parameters that we gave ourselves, or that maybe we encourage in general, is, when you're talking about contentious or difficult political issues like this, to kind of emphasize how you arrived at your opinion, rather than having the end goal be, well, in the next 23 minutes, I'm going to make Elizabeth change her mind because I clearly have the better position. Like it's a different orientation. So we agreed not to come with graphs and like legal cases and like lots of convincing things to make the other person think that we were correct, but to just kind of discuss how we arrived at our positions. So that's what we're going to hopefully demonstrate now. And I want to kind of echo what Elizabeth talked about. And my background in particular, we both have advanced university degrees, and I mean, we both have probably done maybe a little bit too much education ourselves, but it can be a challenge for me, given my background in teaching ethics at a university, to reveal what my cards are, because I have developed a career at being neutral in the classroom in order to facilitate conversations among my students, so that people who are across lots of different kinds of political issues feel comfortable, not just comfortable, but feel engaged and welcome and eager to participate in a conversation, even if there are people in the classroom that disagree. So I don't believe I'm on the record anywhere, especially with abortion, right, of what I actually believe.
Yeah.
And when we were talking, we were like, so what could be the career implications if either one of us actually talk about this? What kind of jobs might I not be able to get in the future? For example, with educational consulting, if it's out there that I am pro-choice. And Elizabeth talked a little bit too about just what that's like. And I think we're also saying to ourselves, gosh darn it, free speech is supposed to be a thing. Like, I'm supposed to be able to talk about what I believe and not face negative consequences, but something around abortion in particular can be so polarizing that the more we can maybe demonstrate how to create safe spaces in arenas like this, the more likely it will be that it happens. So it's with a fair amount of excitement mixed with some trepidation that I enter the conversation, but I believe very strongly that it should happen and that it needs to happen, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. But I feel like that kind of introduction needed to be put out there.
Yes, I
Absolutely.
feel that if someone just heard that we picked abortion, it just seems like, what did these people, did they think about it? And we did think about it
Yeah.
very thoughtfully. And I guess it's with a spirit of vulnerability and a little bit of excitement to be able to talk about something that is so, in a way, taboo. And it's unfortunate that it's taboo because, you know, we live in a country where it's ingrained in our rights that the government can't prosecute us for certain things, but our peers can and our employers can, and that can have just as strong a chilling effect on speech as governmental intervention.
Yeah, and so I think we'll get into it, and with the thank you again for both of you. I mean, it is a very brave thing to do this. So we'll go ahead and get into the conversation as we believe it's built into the name of our podcast. What do we need? Unity. When do we need it? Now. And how do we do that? Well, let's get into it. So without further ado, again, I believe, Breyette, if it's okay, we will start with you if you want to go into your position on the topic and kind of what you wanted to talk about.
Okay. And you know, something like this is nuanced enough that I wish that what seems to be called for is like a carefully thought out position paper. Because as I'm talking in the moment now, I'm going to forget something and I'm going to not maybe articulate some nuance. But I'm hoping that when I talk about my background here, that what comes through is a sense of curiosity and compassion. Because this is just such a difficult topic, and a sense of compassion, not just for myself, but for people who are faced with questions about abortion, either from a personal point of view or from a political legislative point of view. These are difficult topics. I am pro-choice, and I'm firmly pro-choice, and I want to explain what I mean by that and how I've arrived to that position. I was raised in a very conservative, religious, evangelical Christian church.
Okay.
So many of my family members and people that I went to elementary school, high school, college with are not pro-choice. And I probably wasn't initially also growing up. But in college, I happened to take a class from a guy, Jerry Winslow, who was actually writing the church's position on abortion. And he brought it to class as a kind of a rough draft. And to see kind of a person with the authority to write a position statement made me think more about invulnerability with respect to position statements, that they're written by people. And I have since become a Quaker, been a Quaker for 20 or 30 years now. And religion is all wrapped up in abortion, obviously. And it's wrapped up in my position as well. My membership in the Society of Friends, my membership in Quakerism very much informs my position as pro-choice. Quakers believe that there's something of God in everybody, and that can be very much tied to autonomy. It can be tied to the sacred ability of a person to connect directly with a higher power for guidance and advice around difficult topics. And that my involvement with Quakerism has led me to believe that if there's something of God in everybody, then we need to respect each person's ability to reach important, sensitive, critical decisions like those around abortion. Having said that, I would never call myself pro-abortion. I think that life is sacred, and I wish that we could have a society where there were economic and political and other structures that made abortion as least likely as possible. That women felt supported, that families felt supported, so that women wouldn't choose abortion based on fears about taking care of babies and children. I believe also that as women, we really need to have control over our medical decisions for our bodies. I wouldn't want my husband to make medical choices for me. I wouldn't want my neighbor to do that either. I like him, but he doesn't have any business interfering with a medical decision that I make on any part of my body, perhaps especially my reproductive health, let alone legislators or politicians in some other state. And what informed, as a professor who teaches ethics, I'm automatically drawn toward the biomedical principles of ethics. It's autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice. And for many people, the interplay between those principles creates interesting discussion and interesting subsequent problems. We could ask, what's in the best, what decision would produce the most good for the mother, for the father, for the fetus? Which kind of decision would result in the least kind of harm, or the fairest decision for whom? For society, for mother, family, baby. And these biomedical principles don't automatically give us a blueprint for what's right or wrong, but they can demonstrate that questions like this can be incredibly fraught and confusing and difficult. And when we talk about therapeutic versus non-therapeutic abortion, viability versus non-viability of a fetus, who gets to decide if autonomy or consent trumps beneficence or non-malfeasance? And I believe that there are enough good, rational, strong, ethical people who can disagree on this topic. They can disagree on when an abortion should or shouldn't take place, if ever. And because enough reasonable, good, rational, smart people can disagree, that makes me pro-choice. It makes me say, I will not dictate what somebody else's choice is because you may have a different choice than mine. I would advocate for as few abortions as possible and as many happy, healthy pregnancies and childhoods and adults as possible. But I also would advocate for every woman being given the autonomy over her own body to decide when and if she becomes a mother, with contraceptives or with abortions. And that line gets more and more fuzzy and more like, where does it stop between viability versus non-viability, or therapeutic versus non-therapeutic? Those questions are confusing. But again, enough people who are smart can disagree, and that makes me pro-choice because I need to recognize that smart people can disagree with me, and that it should be left up to a very sensitive discussion between medical provider and mother. So let me just see if I missed anything. Goodness, there's just so much. There's so many confusing things. I mean, we can go for, when does life begin, or when is it murder? If you clearly have a fetus who's viable, is it automatically murder? Is contraception murder because you're preventing life? With technology advancing, with frozen embryos, what are the rights of the embryos to grow up into people? And is it murder to have frozen embryos that you discard because you don't want to implant them all, or because there's been a divorce or a separation? I mean, they're just incredibly difficult, challenging conversations that need to be had, but they need to be had with compassion and with a sense of curiosity about how another person arrives at their decision, and what the implications are for not only personal decisions but societal level decisions. There's so much more to talk about, but there's a few minutes in a nutshell of what I've come up with. Is there anything that about what I've said just now, Elizabeth, that you'd like clarification on or that was not clear? I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but is there anything that that you want to know more about, or um, that I could try to make more clear?
No, I think I don't think we disagree necessarily on any of these topics. I do want to say that I'm at I didn't want to move while you were talking, but my phone is dying, so I need to kind of go get a charger.
Well, while you're talking, I forgot one point.
Okay, keep going.
And my point was something else that's really informed my kind of arrival to this position of being pro-choice has been traveling and living in different countries, seeing different kinds of societal level ethical frameworks. Has made me or encouraged me to believe that those things are not set in stone, that they can be chosen. And the last one was becoming a mother myself, being a pregnant person, and having other friends who have become pregnant, maybe just growing older in general, just makes me all that much more aware of what I don't know. And I'm less strident about the few things that I think I do know. It's such an interesting task to take something as complicated as abortion and say, all right, tell you my position in 5 minutes. Like, that's impossible, but
yeah,
important to come up with the self-reflection or self-awareness of, well, why do I believe that? I mean, what has led me to believe this way? And that in itself is a valuable exercise.
well, and whatever you do choose to come up with in those 5 minutes, it shouldn't be impossible to listen to that and to take that for what it's worth. It's not like, who gets to tell you that you have to make it 20 minutes or a half an hour or 2 days, you know. It's
Right.
your position, so who else can tell you your position on that?
It's just like the examples are, what about if she's 14 and this, or it's a sexual assault under these circumstances, or they're married. Like, you can always come up with like micro positions on very specific examples, and I think that's part of what makes this such a hard topic, is you can always come up with some kind of exception to what you've just said that makes what you just said not as correct, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. The whataboutisms are very strong just about in every polarized topic. But it makes
Right.
that's the things you can slam somebody with on Twitter,
Right.
retweet and quote it, and, well, what about when this, or that's when people quote things people even said themselves 5 years ago or whatever.
That's
it is.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you can take snippets that make a person look really bad or really uncaring or unfeeling.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we're at that time where if you want to go through your position and how you got there, we will just listen to you for a second.
Sure. So I don't necessarily disagree with anything Breyette says. And I think that it's a little bit odd to have this pro-choice, pro-life binary choice system when Breyette just listed about 30 different scenarios that could be that you might differ on and still consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice. And there are just so many different shades of what it could mean to you. And again, we talked about, I guess, our backgrounds. And I think for me, what affected my view was I saw a sign that a woman was holding at a pro-choice rally once, and it was a common refrain, and they've made T-shirts of this. It's something like, if men could get pregnant, then abortions would be free and legal and safe. And I kind of thought, I don't really believe that, because I think if men could get pregnant, no one would want an abortion. I think we would have created a culture where men would be able to give birth and have maternity leave and have paid off childcare, and would have strong family structures, and would support even a teenage pregnant person or accidental pregnancy, so that they wouldn't have to do this. So I'm Chinese, and Chinese people are, China is very well known for its one-child policy. So abortion is rampant, and Chinese people tend to be very, very permissive about abortion. And because of the one-child policy and the traditional favoring of male, of sons, millions, tens of millions, I don't know exactly how many, of little baby girls were aborted in favor of sons. And now my parents obviously moved to America, but it was their generation. So of the people of my generation, there are far fewer women than there are men. And it's caused all sorts of problems. And I think what I see in this society is not necessarily, that abortion was bad or anything, but that here's a society where abortion is legal and relatively safe, and society accepts it, and women aren't better. They're not better off. The women are still constricted. I mean, it's not that they're forced to abort their daughters. Obviously, the one-child policy has all sorts of things. This is that's a whole nother podcast right there. But it didn't, the permissive abortion attitude to me was not what we should be striving for. I think that in some ways, when we think, oh, let's, I saw a terrible movie recently where this woman gets pregnant accidentally, and many of the characters say, well, you're pro-choice, so you should abort the child. And without any regard to whether she wanted the kid, she was very well off. And even though it was an accident, and I don't think that this is true of pro-choice people, I do think that it kind of shortcuts the idea that if we get to abortion, we'll have better equality. And I don't think that's true. I think we need to me, being pro-life is we need to work towards making life the choice. And I don't believe in reducing abortion rights necessarily legally through legislation, but I do believe that we should be putting all our efforts into making life as viable and as appealing a choice as possible, and supporting women who may not have the opportunities, so that if there's a reason that she's getting abortion, and that reason is I don't have the money, or I don't feel prepared, or I'm going to have so much social stigma, this is not the right time. Like, I don't think that we should be, it's been, over 50 years since Roe v. Wade, and that we're fighting for a woman's right to, that we're fighting for women who don't have options, just fighting for her right to abort her child. To me, seems like we have failed her. And to me, that it seems like we're kind of letting ourselves off the hook. So I definitely think that, right now we don't have anything. We haven't made a culture that values women and gives them options. To me, this is not, it's not a choice. If you can't, it's either destitution, destitution with a baby or destitution without a baby. And I know that, as we talked a little bit about whataboutism, and I know that certainly people on the pro-life side can seem really callous. And I know a lot of people will say they're not really trying to help women. They're really about controlling. And I can understand that. Certainly a lot of legislation is poorly written, and does not take into account lots of things, lots of situations. But to me, our our direction, our emphasis should be on life. That's how I define my role or my view.
I think it might be surprising to me, or maybe to both of us, that we actually have some important areas of overlap in emphasizing life, because I think that we both agree on that. I think it might take us to some different kinds of paths or conclusions. So for me, it has seemed irresponsible to be pro-choice and not be actively involved in social service organizations. That seems to be incongruous. So I have been on the board of directors for the social services, Department of Social Services for Charlottesville, been on the board of directors for Monticello Area Action Community. I've been a foster parent. I've been an adoptive parent. For me to be pro-choice means that I work toward creating a society in which people are more likely to be able to keep their pregnancies and keep their babies. I have not chosen to be out marching for the right for an abortion. I have chosen to kind of slant my very firm belief in pro-choice in that creating community cultures around life. At the same token, I appreciate people who are continuing to fight back against controlling legislation that would take away women's ability to have even therapeutic abortions after, or abortions after sexual assault, or I would continue also to fight for, if given the opportunity, with time and scheduling and all kinds of things, to fight for women to be able to have continued control over when and if they become a parent. It was surprising and kind of nice to know that Elizabeth and I overlapped in that way, emphasizing life. And I've been serious about that. And my own choices to be pro-choice is not like I just described in the work I've done in community settings. I took some notes. I think I just want to review them real quick from Elizabeth. No, I think that's mostly it. And this is kind of a nutshell. Elizabeth and I have had broader discussions about this, and I think that we're nicely summarizing what we talked about.
Well, I wanted to say that I wasn't at all impinging on Breyette's belief in life or in life culture, and I'm not even necessarily sure that like this is. I do not think poorly of anyone who's pro-life or pro-choice. We've talked about how complicated an issue it is, and I think that it really, to me, you can do absolutely nothing for pro-life or pro-choice, and I think I would respect your view on it if it's, I think, well thought out. And we do agree on so many different things, and there wasn't anything that I found myself disagreeing with when Breyette was talking about her perspective. But I think I think you can tell from that we're both people who thought about this a lot, who have come from particular upbringings, and we've come to perhaps we've considered a lot of the same scenarios and a lot of the same angles. We're both women. So, and we came to different conclusions, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I think, and I want to add on, there's not only nothing wrong with that, but I would really fight for that ability to continue, that Elizabeth gets to have her opinion. She gets to have her choice. That for me is fundamental. What pro-choice means is that people get to have different opinions. And I hopefully can be part of whatever is needed to continue to have those safe spaces that people can have different opinions. Now, if your opinion is going to be that women can't have therapeutic abortions in the first trimester, let's go, let's argue. I'm going to hopefully win, but I want to protect your right to have that position. That's important to me too.
Elizabeth, do you guys want to discuss that particular part of the discussion?
I think we can go to your questions.
Yeah.
Well, we could do rebuttal back and forth. That has to end at some point.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that's fine. I don't disagree with any of that. That's, I think that that's what America is, that we should be fighting for the right to have different opinions. I mean, we're a very diverse country. And if everyone had the same thought, then the answer probably is that some people are being suppressed because it's just unlikely that 400 million people would have the same opinion on anything.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Elizabeth, at what level should any lawmakers at any level be involved in this discussion?
So I tend to be pretty libertarian, and I would think at no level. I don't think this should be a legal issue. I think that what should happen is at the local levels, we should be working to increase supportive communities and networks for anyone who just finds out that they're pregnant and that they need help. Mm-hmm. To me, that is not what the pro-life movement is currently, but ideally, that would be ultimately what would happen. I mean, I have often thought that abortion is a very strange issue for both sides because conservatives tend to be for small government, and that would tend to mean that they shouldn't be involved in abortion. They shouldn't be involved in many things. And I'm consistent in this. I don't think it should be legislated. It is something that involves I'm an attorney, and most people who are legislators are attorneys, and that means that they probably have very little understanding of both medicine and ethics. So that was a joke. But
not a joke.
Wisdom. So I don't think that I wouldn't want a legislator to work on abortion or legislating abortion, because I don't think that they're well equipped to do so. And I'm a libertarian, and I think people should be allowed to do what they want, especially when it comes to their own bodies. But I think where legislation and government could help is in providing, maybe not providing services, because again, that's more of a big government type of thing, but in supporting, in some sort of supportive role for organizations that help those with unexpected, unplanned, dangerous pregnancies.
Okay. Breyette, your response?
It's interesting because I wasn't expecting to have this response. I'm going to say it. I feel like I kind of disagree with that, and that I do think that politicians should be involved to protect what local communities might take away from women's ability to seek medical care at the local level due to religious or other influences. I think that it can be possible for local culture to, unfortunately, try to suppress women's ability to do all kinds of things. I mean, especially medically throughout medical history, and especially with respect to obstetrics and gynecology. Women have been fighting for a long time to gain increasing control over whether or not they're sterilized, whether or not they can be assaulted when they're married, whether or not they have to have hysterectomies or lobotomies because they have strong personalities. I mean, we still have continued work to do that I think needs to be safeguarded at more than local levels, at state or national levels, to make sure that women's rights are protected. Um, but maybe that does line up with being a blue, with more like government interference, as people would say, huh? I don't know.
And Elizabeth, what do you think about? Do you think you disagree with anything she said, or agree, or what do you line up?
Well, I just don't think that the government could intervene. I mean, you are, if you're in a religious community and they're against abortion, I'm not entirely sure how the government can say, here, we're going to break you out of this community, or if it's your parents that are keeping you and you don't have car transportation, I'm not entirely sure how the government could do that. And I think it's just, I don't want the government to have the power to, I think that opens up even more potential problems if I think, let's say I would say it's like your parents or the people who are most likely to prevent you from having an abortion would be the people that know you. So it's like and have some sort of control over you, like perhaps your parents or the father. And if the government has some way of getting in between you and your parents, or you and the father of the child, I don't know what that would look like. But I'm a little afraid of that.
Okay. And Breyette, do you want to have a rebuttal to that at all?
Yeah, I think I wasn't necessarily talking about interfering in like personal relationships, but just like in general. I didn't read the news as much this week, but I think I saw, was it Ohio, that had passed near total ban on abortions throughout the state, or was working on it this week. And what I mean about kind of legislative levels or legal levels, I mean preventing counties or cities or states from saying this is a place where women's autonomy doesn't matter as much, that other things matter instead. And I think that there does need to be some kind of a national setting of a point that says, here, kind of what Roe v. Wade did, say, women get to have this right to privacy. They get to have this choice because that's the way it's going to go. And I feel like without some kind of government interference, or without some kind of government legislative action, that rights of women would be chipped away at the local level, from shutting down of clinics to denying or shaming medical providers, or women in general. I think that we are not to the point yet where if we say there are no laws on the books at all, and we will just trust that the right thing happens as far as women's health goes across the country, we're not there yet, I don't think. I still think we need clear protections articulated by politicians and other people in power.
Elizabeth, where do you draw the line on clear protection versus, government sort of overreach, as you discussed earlier?
Well, I think that Breyette's thing makes sense if you believe that the government will only protect rights. But if you have that opportunity, if you give the government the right to say we're not going to have, I need to focus in again. So don't say anything to me because I won't hear you. I think if you give the ability to say you cannot pass any kind of legislation to prohibit abortion, then you also give the government the right to take it away. And again, as Breyette said, we're not at this point where we would really expect or trust the government to say, we're just going to expand abortion rights. So if you give a government that power, it has that power to give, and also has that power to take away. To me, it's like when I heard this analogy about gay marriage, and they said banning gay marriage is like if a man orders a salad in a restaurant and someone intercepts the waiter and says, no, he's going to have the soup. And that was to say that I'm gonna bungle this up, but like he shouldn't have the right to say he can't have the salad. And I think the point they were trying to make is that I think the point, the thing that I thought was weird with gay marriage is that it seemed like what we were going for was not that person who interrupts the waiter and says he can't have that, but that we have someone interrupting the waiter to say, yes, he will have the salad, because that other person, what we're doing with, yes, they can get married, yes, no, they can't get married, is we're giving someone control over something that they have no control over. Like when you order something in a restaurant, no one gets to say whether you can or cannot do anything. And what we've done is we've had, okay, people, we were having referendums, that fight for gay marriage, like, yes, we approve of this. And I thought, the libertarian case for this is that no one should weigh in on this. Like the government should not weigh in at all. And because it's possible that the government would weigh in the other way, that it'd say gay marriage would be banned. And to me, this is none of the government's business. They can go one way or the other, and I don't know which way they're going to go, and I don't want them to have that choice.
Breyette, your response, what do you think about that analogy?
So I think some things, I think a salad sounds great. I love salads, but I think some things shouldn't be on the menu. I don't think a mom gets to decide that her week-old baby shouldn't exist. I think that's murder. I do think that a woman should be able to say, I'm going to take contraceptives because I don't want to get pregnant. And where that line morphs between clearly personal choice and murder is tricky, right? And lots of people reasonably disagree. I don't think that the government should never weigh in on moral issues like this. I think that as a democratic society, we have a responsibility to say, this is the kind of morality, these are the kinds of laws that we want to be enforced in our country. And that has changed. I mean, ethics has changed. What's right and wrong has changed in our country's history. You shouldn't be able to order otter on the menu or muskrat. Those are protected animals, right? We're not going to do that. But salads are great. I love salad. Should, a minor who's been sexually assaulted never be able to have an abortion? I mean, some people, that's a what ifism, right? Like that's an extreme example, but there are probably some examples where we could say, maybe always, if a mother's going to die and she knows that she's pregnant, but only 2 days pregnant, and there's been no implantation yet, she can choose not to get pregnant because she knows she's going to die. The mother's life or the fetus's life, you got to choose one. I don't think it's always true that you get to choose the fetus at the mother's expense. And not many people do make that choice. But when do you get to, where does that fuzzy line become clearly the mother can't make that choice after viability, 8.5 months, 9 months? Really tricky questions. And I know that, again, the spectrum is going from, I think most people reasonably say a woman should not be forced to have a baby, not be forced to get pregnant, to she's not allowed to kill her babies once they're born. Like when that happens, and I do believe that we need to organize and say to our politicians and to our state legislators, this is what we would like to see happen in terms of a woman's ability to control what happens in her own body. In 2020, this is where we stand. The cutoff is here, is it first trimester? Enough people maybe get together and say first trimester. Roe versus Wade says first trimester. Seems to be pretty clearly the mother's choice. Third trimester has to be compelling. It's much trickier third trimester, but I again would hope that the conversation is more tilted in terms of energy and in terms of money and power on the side of encouraging people to choose life encouraging people to choose, to be able to choose to have healthy, viable pregnancies, and to not choose abortion.
I think it's just an intractable problem about size of government, and we have different opinions on this. And to me, I guess, as you know, I'm my family is from China, so we are, in certain ways, it has turned us extremely libertarian because we have seen what happens when, and we're Chinese, and obviously the people in charge in China are Chinese too. So there are people that are quote unquote like us making decisions for us. And we didn't like this. We didn't like any part of this. And now that we're in America or a minority, we especially don't want people making choices for us. And it's a complicated issue, and there are all sorts of different scenarios. And I don't think that having more laws, and especially the people who would lobby to get these laws, the people who are more connected, I think there might be compromises, there might be things that are difficult. And I think as we talk about like women having the choice to control their bodies, people's bodies and situations are so unique. And I would much rather, obviously there are pros and cons to each side, and you can weigh your pros and cons differently, and you come with different, you come out with different results. And again, that's good. And it's just, I wouldn't want a legislature to talk to lobbyists and pass a bill, and then someone with their pregnancy, with their doctor, can't make the decision that is best for them because it's violating some law, and maybe they're that random case that no one thought of or no one expected. Of course, there will be some downsides of not having legislation. There are also downsides of having legislation. And this is such a personal issue. And I think, and it's such a one person at a time issue that, we're not trusting communities to care for, to act in the best interest. We're not necessarily, we're wary of parents not acting in the best interest of some of these children. So at least those people know the situation here. And now we're trying to say, like, these legislators and maybe people who care about this, they might know better about what's going to happen in the future to little girls. I mean, obviously there are pros and cons, and just in my point of view, again, I live outside of Washington D.C, so the federal government is a huge, some would say, menace. It's just it's our industry, and there are some things that go well, and there are some things that don't. But I don't want other people. I don't. My personal opinion is that it would be better not to have involvement of other people in such a personal choice. But I can understand that other people would have different views, and my libertarian views are pretty out there, pretty much like beginning of the country settling the. And I understand that this is unpopular, and so I don't expect anyone to agree with my opinions. And I guess that's part of the appeal of Braver Angels is I don't think generally my opinions don't make sense, but I think that they're not popular. They're not views that anyone necessarily would take. And I think I would be okay with less legislation. I don't think that's actually the world we live in, but in my ideal world, if that's what we're talking about, and I think when we have these discussions, we are talking about what we're moving towards. I'd rather have less legislation and suffer the consequences of less legislation and protection in exchange for not having legislation that might negatively affect people in the future.
If I could summarize real quick where I think you two line up, a very general summary, Breyette, you do believe in autonomy for women to make the choices, but you do believe in some level of government to make it safe to make those choices and provide those rights. to a certain degree, but you would push toward as few abortions as possible. And where Elizabeth, you would say as few laws as possible to legislate the situation at all, to leave the choices to a free and reasonable society at large for the most part. Is that fair at all to summarize your points, Breyette?
Well, it was a little bit of an oversimplification because
Okay.
there are a number of things to consider. Autonomy is one, but beneficence is another. Like, what is the most kind, good outcome for the different stakeholders involved, for the mother, for the parents, for the father, for the fetus itself, for society, and what kinds of actions would result in the least amount of harm, and what kind of, I mean, if you want to talk about legislative positioning, what kind of government stances can result in the most fairness, the most equity, the most justice. Um, so I don't want to emphasize personal autonomy without acknowledging that there are other important principles at play. And I think that, it's a kind of a contradiction, right? Because I do think that I firmly believe that government shouldn't be involved in these personal choices. I think for me, that's the definition of pro-choice. The government should not be in the business of legislating what kind of choice I get to make as a woman or what kind of choices women get to make in general. But I do think that there needs to be legislation to say that, because in the absence of such, local communities and states will take that away from women. So it's a little bit of a contradiction there.
Okay. And Elizabeth, did I summarize your position at all very well? And, go ahead.
I think the only thing I would quibble with would be that you said that the decision should be left up to society. And I don't think it should be left up to society. I think it should be left up to the person who's pregnant and their doctor, and potentially the father. But I mean, I think that, our backgrounds touch on this a lot. Like, Breyette doesn't trust the government to, I think that she wants women to have the autonomy. She doesn't think that people will, that the government will take the right away if it's not enforced. And I guess my experience on the other hand is, if you give the government power, they will run with it and take power, and they won't necessarily give you the power that you thought you were giving them.
So at what level would you trust, what kind of law would you trust, Elizabeth, to protect rights as Breyette is laid out? Is that a fair question, Breyette?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, what kind of legal steps or legislative steps might be needed to protect rights? The right of a woman to have that kind of personal decision-making process with her medical provider, and not have medical providers be sued or have their license taken away if they perform a procedure, or medical clinics shut down because they perform procedures, or like what kind of things might be needed in order for women's rights or autonomy to be protected, the freedom.
Well, I think that question, I think if there's less legislation, then that kind of absolves some of these problems. Like, what keeps doctors from being sued? You can't be sued if they're not committing a crime. And where's the crime created? In legislation. And you assume that the legislation will be in your favor, but perhaps a legislation that is meant to protect women, maybe a doctor falls slightly aside of it. They have more things to keep track of. You can't just sue a doctor if there's no law. It's based on the law, and depending on how the law is written, that actually puts a doctor or a woman in much more peril if it's not written correctly, if they fall on the long side of it, that they have a claim to action against a woman for her own choice. If there is no law against this, then you can't just sue someone for doing something that is not, there's no legislation on. But if you create the law, you invite the opportunity for litigation against them.
Well, Elizabeth is a lawyer, so she has more experience in this area than I do in the actual legal aspects of abortion. So it's important, I think, to listen to what she has to say there. I I speak from intuition only when I talk about the necessity of political legal structures for protecting women's rights. It seems to me like those are increasingly impinged on. The direction that our country seems to be going is not toward natural and naturally honoring women's choice. It seems to be going in the other direction. But she does have more experience in this area than I do.
And does she make a point with, like you mentioned, states banning abortion at any level? Is that not the government overreaching to a point where they've taken that power, like she said?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously would disagree with that fundamentally for being pro-choice. You know, governments don't have any business in that. Something we haven't talked about, you know, is the meeting place between religious freedom and women's autonomy here. That would be a different podcast. I mean, it's an important one. When those things conflict, what happens? Because they're both pretty important in our democracy, both pretty important conversations in our democracy. I think individuals' right, pursuit of health and happiness, and an individual's right for freedom of religion. So when those conflict, then what happens? Which is part of the opportunity for real confusing mess in this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen how the discussion has strayed into lots of other potential subtopics, government overreach, you know, by and large. Maybe, you know, the two of you started off by stating pro-life versus pro-choice, and even delineating it to that oversimplification, or that, no, not delineating, but making it that simple likely isn't a wise thing to do, because it probably isn't that simple, right? So maybe the question is, what is the discussion we should have regarding abortion?
I think it's all too easy for me to say, what's a label I can put on you that makes me disagree with you? Like, how can I just shut down the opportunity to be in the same room with you because you have a different position on a triggering topic? This is something that I think we both feel pretty strongly about, but we both also agreed that we were open to hearing and supporting alternate points of view, which is why we chose this topic. Several others we took off because I didn't feel ready to have a conversation because it would be too triggering. And I think that the more we can emphasize underlying commonalities and underlying humanity, and then to ask and say, hey, you know, I respect you as a person. Would you feel comfortable having a conversation about abortion, or about defunding the police, or Black Lives Matter, or immigration, or social media regulation? Would you feel comfortable and ready for that conversation? Inviting the conversation rather than dictating it that it must happen. Otherwise, my label as being on any one of those sides of the issues has to trump yours, and if I can't convince you, we can't be friends. We need to emphasize on each other's humanity and do it in a respectful way. Our country needs this so much right now. If we can have a civil conversation about abortion, hopefully that can be inspiring for other people to have civil conversations about other kinds of things. And I really hope that the time we've spent here together can be useful for other people to go boldly where maybe other people haven't gone enough recently.
Maybe with everything being so oversimplified, and as Breyette said, with trying to apply labels to somebody so you can, or to a group so you can, you know, easily label them as what you disagree with and then walk away, so to speak. maybe the question needs to start with, what should the discussion be regarding abortion? Because I think listening to both of you, you stated your positions with those labels, but I think the two of you coalesce in so many places. It's hard to say that you would definitely disagree on just abortion. Like you could unpack that so much. So what would be the discussion to have on abortion? What is the question to ask?
I mean, I think that these labels that we have for each other to just find these issues really separate us more, and they're not even necessarily providing useful information about what someone believes. And it is, as both of you had said, that it is easy to shoot someone down when you just hear a label. And it's so often that we hear you're pro-life, you don't care about women, or you don't care about the poor, or you don't care about any of these things. And I think if we're going to have discussions, I think it probably needs to be on a case-by-case basis. It has to be about specific legislation. I mean, we could talk about generalized, and I think that's good. And it's good in getting to know someone. But in terms of, and I think that is necessary work before you can talk about more specific issues, just to know where people are coming from. But there should be some sort of assumption that the person, until proven incorrect, that the person is coming from a good place, that they are intelligent, and that they are moral, and that they are not out to get anyone, or that they're ignorant. And so much of Brave Angels is just getting people to see each other as people again. And you could be flawed, you might not have thought of some things are in your purview or other purview, or sometimes you just have different opinions. And that's fine. That's all wonderful. And we all just, when we're talking about very specific issues, we can come from this knowledge of we're all good people. We all have something to share. We have good perspectives. And I want to hear what your perspective is, because I'm curious. I know I have so much more to learn, and my view doesn't encompass everyone else's view.
I appreciate that. And I have something to add. I think kind of what we have demonstrated today and in our preparation, in answering your question about how to have a conversation about abortion, I think that one of the answers is to concentrate on the underlying values. Our underlying values are similar here, right? They're similar in terms of prioritizing life and minimizing a society where abortion happens. And I think that if we had started off with a what if and give a specific contentious, difficult scenario, that we would be less likely to have a valuable subsequent conversation. If we start off talking about values, emphasizing common experience in humanity, I think that is a different starting point. I had an experience recently at a special education meeting here in Augusta County for parents of special education kids and or kids in special education. And I introduced myself to the president afterwards, and he was a minister, and I said, well, I'm a Quaker. And he said, oh, you'd be so excited to hear about our pro-life clinic, about how we really limit women's ability to have abortions. I know that as a Quaker, you would love that. And I said, well, actually, I'm firmly pro-choice. And he was so horrified, he had a physical reaction like, oh, get away from me. And I said, no, wait a minute. We're here because we both have children in special education. Let's bond over that. We disagree on that other issue, and it's a big one, but let's be friends anyway. And by the end of the conversation, he had invited me to his next prayer meeting, and I'd really like to go. It was right before COVID hit, so I haven't had a chance to go, but we left with enough of a understanding, enough of a pivot to something that we both really agreed on together, and not saying, oh my gosh, you love abortion, you want lots of abortion because you're pro-choice, that's what you do. And I'm like, it didn't end that way because we both chose to pivot back to something that we had a shared interest or responsibility in. And that's, I think, another way to approach topics like this.
That's great. Yeah, it's good to hear that you were able to turn a conversation that could have went, it could have ended right there, right?
Oh, he he wanted it to end, and then part of me was like, "Ooh, I wouldn't mind this ending either. I could go home and drink some tea." But the end result was that we started a friendship that maybe would be unlikely, and that I got to hear more about his experience as the parent of someone in special education and got a chance to learn more about that, about kinds of questions I should ask or could be asking. And I'm richer because of it. And I would be a richer, better person if I do get to go to that Bible study that he has at his pro-life organization at church and show up with kindness and respect and to learn more about their perspective. I would be a better person because of that. And maybe I could share some about where I'm coming from too. That would be the goal.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. And I think the two of you highlight why it's important to look at everyone as individuals, but also to behave as individuals. I don't think once in this conversation that either of you said, well, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. You use your names and then you talk about what you believe and why you believe it. Right. And you can belong to a party, you can belong to a group. I don't think there's any problem with that. But I think you better make damn well sure you believe about everything that group believes in if you want to label yourself there. Otherwise, you give the other side the power to do what that gentleman was going to do with you because you said this term and he knew everything he needed to know about you before he even had a conversation.
Well, and it goes a little bit deeper than that because it's not just group affiliation, it's checking in with each other. I mean, Elizabeth and I have checked in. How are you doing? How's your stress level? Are you still feeling like this is an okay conversation? Because we would tell each other, I want you to know that my friendship with you is more important than this topic. And if it's too much, let's talk about something else. So compassion, empathy, understanding, and prioritizing people over convincing others of a point of view, like that is also important, not just using people's names and saying, hi, I'm Breyette, I'm a Democrat. How are you? I'm pro-choice. It's, Elizabeth, tell me who you are. I really would love to have the opportunity to have a relationship with you, a friendship with you. We both agree on bridging the political divide. Let's keep that center. And if abortion takes us off there or defunding the police or whatever, let's not go there because it's more important that we have this shared underlying value of bridging political divides.
Agreed. Elizabeth, do you want to offer any final thoughts? I think I have one more question for each of you, but if you want to respond to that or offer any final thoughts, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Echoing just the same things. We've made politics into such a tribal sport these days, but the difference is when I hear people arguing about sports, and I've seen lots of men start up a conversation about, you're a Mets fan, I'm a Yankees fan, and they'll rib each other, but actually they become better friends. I've never seen anyone, even if they're like mortal enemies, they vote for totally different teams. I've never seen people argue about that. Even though they're extremely tribal, they always come closer together. And there's something that we should be talking about. Hey, you're a red, or I'm a red, you're a blue, and we're both interested in politics. We're both interested in this issue. How are we not closer together at the end of this instead of farther away? Because it's actually a commonality. Even though we are tribes, it doesn't mean we're rooting for different teams. It doesn't mean that we can't be friends. Even if I don't like it when the Yankees win or the Mets win or something like that. Like, this should be something. There's nothing wrong with having your tribe and being very strongly part of your tribe, but it should bring people together, not apart.
Okay. And with that in
I
mind, go
I
ahead.
have something, one more thing.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up here, I want to tell very clearly, um, Elizabeth, that I really am grateful for the opportunity that we have had to prepare for this podcast and to do this together. Like, this has been a really enriching and valuable experience for me, and I've learned more about a differing perspective on this issue, but on other issues too, as we've kind of talked about things. And I feel like I've learned more about myself, and that we have been brave enough to show up today, is something that I think we can be both proud about. And um, I really want to tell you how grateful I am that we've been able to do this. So thank you.
I want to respond and just say that I couldn't have this conversation with any of my friends. They would just yell at me. So I think that I want to congratulate or thank Breyette for, I guess, congratulate her that she can have a conversation, which it sounds condescending, but it's actually quite remarkable. And I think it's definitely brings up perspectives and a point of view. And I've really appreciated this process of talking about this and getting to know someone's worldview that is different than mine. And it does inform my decisions in the future.
Well said. So at the Unity Now podcast team and our origins with the Unity 2020 movement, we are very, very interested in highly capable, courageous, and patriotic leaders. Breyette, who comes to mind if you put those three in place?
What comes to mind is that's an increasingly difficult conversation to answer. And it seems glib, but I'm going to say John Stewart.
Okay. And same question to you, Elizabeth. Highly capable, courageous, patriotic leaders. Who comes to mind?
To me, I heard Brene Brown, and she addressed this very issue about about leading people. And she talks about being vulnerable in your leadership. And she teaches she teaches CEOs and companies. And I think if everyone listened to one of her books, we would have much better leadership.
Okay. Thank you both for that. And unless you have anything else to add, we'll go ahead and wrap up there. I think we are only scratching the surface. I think the two of you are now well warmed up, and we could have part 2, 3, and 4 if we wanted to. So you're both
absolutely true.
Definitely invited back, and we could reserve more time maybe and get deeper into abortion if you want to continue your thoughts there, or pick other topics as well. So we thank you very much for taking the time tonight. It was a very brave thing to do, and hopefully, your peers will look at it as a better way to have conversations with somebody you may disagree with, and all of our listeners and viewers will do so as well. So I thank you very much for joining us.
Unity Now, we appreciate all you're doing. My goodness, thank you for this opportunity and for the important work that you're doing in so many areas. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. And we should probably do a shout out to Braver Angels at braverangels.org.
Great.
Visit the website, become a member.
That's right. Nice.
Very good. So with that, we will wrap up. This has been Unity Now, and we're signing off. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Sorry for all the technical issues.
No worries.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for watching the Unity Now podcast. If you enjoyed our show, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by clicking the links in the description below. Bah!